Have you ever sat and thought to yourself, I would like to play retro video games in 2026, but I don't have a clue where to start. I thought, why not have a chat today about the different options that I see that you can take to play those older games in 2026 that are available at your disposal. We can look at the different variety of options you have out there, the choices that I've made, and the choices that I would like to explore in the future. Let's dive in. So the way I see it, there is a couple of different ways that you could take this to try and play those classic games, those games from your childhood or your adolescence that you'd love to go back and visit now. Or maybe you are someone who's a little bit younger, who's heard lots of people talk about these absolute classics that you've not had a chance to play and you want to change that. You came to the right place. So in my eyes, the easiest solution that you could take right now to play some of these games would be emulation. Now, emulation is a little bit of it's an interesting topic within the sort of retro game space because it's very much split down the middle between people who say that because you can do various different things, upscaling, it's easy to access, it is quote unquote free, as it were, that it is the only way these days to play games. And then you have the other side of the coin, will say that because you aren't playing on the original hardware, which we'll get to that later on in this video, that you are missing out. But for me personally, if you're wanting to jump in to something that is very, very easy and accessible, it is the way to go. So say you've went through a cupboard, you've went through a set of drawers, you've went up the loft of your parents' house, and you found like a classic PS1 game, something like the first Spider-Man game, right? The absolute, for me anyway, that is like the pinnacle of gaming from that PS1 era because it's probably one of my favourite games of that sort of slice in time, as it were. And you have nothing to play on, but you found this disc and you're like, I own this game, so I am not doing anything illegal by playing this, but I want to go out and I want to play this. What can I do? And you could go online, you could find Duckstation as the sort of PlayStation emulator that's pretty good. It's fairly plug and play. There's loads of instructions online how to do it. Totally free to use. But the logic being that if you already own that game, you can then use that to then emulate that on your PC and sit and play. If you've got like an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller from the last couple of generations, you could plug that into your computer, do some very, very quick button mappings, and boom, done. You are off at the races. Now for me, this is a really, really easy one to do if you've got a reasonably powerful computer or you are actually emulating games that are fairly old and therefore don't actually need that power. Like if you're looking at emulating PS3 and Xbox 360 games, you're probably going to need a fair bit of juice because those emulators, whilst they're making some really, really good progress, do need a little bit of processing power. But on the whole, these things don't need an awful lot of power. Like my last PC, so I've got a 3070 Ti and this current one, so I would have zero issues, but my last PC was a GTX 970 or 980. That would be able to emulate PS1 and PS2 games of that era, the original Xbox, with little to no problems, really, if I'm honest. And when you look at it from that affordability perspective, it is a really, really nice and easy way to go. Now, I would say do not emulate games that you don't own. That is the whole shtick of, technically speaking, if you're going to download games that already exist out there, you're not supposed to do that. You are supposed to own them. I understand, though, the arguments and points people make of you can't buy PS2 games brand new from a brick and mortar store that's going directly to publishers anymore, and I also kind of agree with that. So it's one of those ones where certainly the emulators themselves are completely free, and as long as they don't have any like really weird ways of getting like firmware keys and stuff like that, they're all totally fine to use. Usually quite plug and play, and you'll find that for a variety of platforms they exist. That you can find emulators for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Advance, SP, DS, 3DS, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, etc. You can find them all online, and a lot of these are actually quite good in terms of if you don't necessarily want to sit at a desk or you don't necessarily want to go through the rigmarole of getting your PC on your television. A lot of these work fairly well on handhelds these days. Like I know we used to have a Steam Deck and I dabbled around with the emulators on there, and I must admit they were pretty decent. The Steam Deck is a pretty reasonably powerful bit of kit that, to me, if you're looking at that kind of era, or if you're looking at handheld games as well, obviously I know split screen Nintendo DS and 3DS stuff doesn't necessarily work as well, but it's okay. But certainly Game Boy, Game Boy Color, all that kind of stuff, PSP, They're all really, really good on these platforms. So, you know, if you're looking at a quick way to dive in, I mean, you can even play Pokemon on your phone these days, which, imagine saying that to someone 25 years ago, I'd imagine their head would have been spinning. But that, to me, is a really, really good entryway, and I want to dabble in some game. I don't know necessarily if I'll like these games. I think that emulation's absolutely perfect for that. Yes, you can do things like upscaling as well. Like a lot of games will let you upscale that to 1080p or even 4K. You can normally go onto various different websites and find texture packs that you can then pop into your folders and make these games look even better than what they did before. On the flip side of that is you might be sort of straying away from what that game was and trying to make it something that maybe it isn't. That's normally the sort of counter argument that people make. But different strokes for different folks. Me personally, I don't really have much of an issue with emulation because it is fairly easy plug and play. You got a heck of a lot of options out there and you can go do what you want to do. The next avenue then you can take is, okay, maybe I don't necessarily want to go through the rigmarole of doing emulation. Say I don't have a PC at all that's particularly powerful, or I'm not mega tech savvy. Well, you do have some options if you've got a latest gen console that can let you access some stuff that's a little bit older. So the Series X and S are actually quite good in terms of backwards compatibility. Pretty much everything that was on the Xbox One, for example, works on the Series S and X with zero issues, and the vast majority of the Xbox 360 library also falls under that category. So say you go up this loft, you go into a cupboard and you're looking and you find a classic Xbox 360 game, something like Fable 3. I absolutely loved the Fable games when they're out. I'm really excited that Fable is coming back at some point. We don't know when, but the second one and the third one for me were absolute classic. If you found this game, you could drop that into your Xbox One, you could drop that into your Series X, obviously with the disc drive. S, you'd have to download it from the store instead. You can just drop the disc in and that will just work. It will go in, it will download like a version of the game that is quote unquote backwards compatibility friendly. It still uses the disc to verify that indeed you are the owner of that game, and you can sit and play it and you can play these classics. And I love that option because it's a little bit more plug and play. Like, yes, you've got to drop the disc in and wait a little minute. Depending on how good your internet is, it might not necessarily be too long, and you don't have to faff around with emulation. You don't have to work around with upscalers because, you know, if you've got that modern console, you will most likely have a modern television. Everything just kind of seamlessly works. You don't have to deal with any odd hardware things that you may have to overcome, which we will get to that in just a moment. Between these two consoles, they also have a variety of different things on the stores that you can download. A good example would be the Jak and Daxter games are all on the PlayStation Store, so you could in theory play that on a PS5, even though those are PS2 games. I know they brought out a PS3 sort of remaster trilogy, if you'd like, and it runs perfectly fine. But if you don't have a PS3, you don't have that game, that is an option. You can go download them a couple of quid and it just kind of works. Now, with some games, your mileage may vary on how well those ports work, because ultimately you are not playing the original game on original hardware. When you're on emulation, it can also have the exact same thing if you're emulating on a computer, where sometimes the emulators can do some dodgy stuff when they're trying to pretend to be a PlayStation or pretend to be a Nintendo DS, because ultimately they aren't. They're just trying their hardest to make the game think they are. But for me, a really good, solid option. Not as good as playing it on other methods, I think, because you don't have the same level of choice all of the time. But for the vast majority of stuff, this is a really solid option to play these older games and experience them as if you were playing them 15, 20 years ago. So before we jump in to what I do and how I approach this, if you enjoyed this video so far, if you like the kind of stuff we're doing, press the like button and press the subscribe button. It helps the channel a lot. And comment down below, of the last like 25 years, what is one of those games that you wish that you could play that for whatever reason you just can't? You are missing the console, or you haven't got around a backwards compatibility issue with an Xbox. Let us know. So this is option 3 in our ways in which you can play retro video games in 2026. You could be emulating these on a PC, you could do your backwards compatibility. And then option 3 is playing on original hardware. Now, original hardware being you actually physically have a PlayStation 2 and you've got PlayStation 2 discs, you've got PlayStation 2 controllers, and you hook it up to a television and you just play it. Now, for me, this is the best way to play because there is no faffing around with emulation. There is no, I hope there's like a remaster or a remake of this game. I can just drop the disc in and go. But there are a few things that you need to be mindful of that will end up impacting on the experience that you have, because there is, in effect, then from this, there's two separate ways of then playing these games. And let's first talk about the approach that I take. So the approach that I take is playing the retro video games on a retro console, in this case the PlayStation 2, but using an upscaler. So the trouble you will have in 2026 with playing these games on modern televisions is that the vast majority of them do not have the ports on the back of them to play these games, and if they do have the ports on the back of them, the way that they interpret that old television signal to bring it into the modern way of displaying things doesn't quite work, and that then causes issues with input lag, it causes issues with display, the colours can be off, and it just looks a bit weird. So what you'll find is that when you go down this route, you have these two options, and the option I take is to grab a really good set of, we're talking about the PlayStation 2, we're talking about like component cables. Now though, you have the next issue, which is you have this really, really good cable, you got it plugged into your PlayStation, you're good to go, but you don't have a component in on your television. Now, some people might be lucky and they have it's like a 3.5mm jack port that some televisions have, where it converts the component cables and you can then put them in. I think it's called like mini component. I think I could be wrong there. And you can plug that into your TV through these converters, and that works. I've found that with personal experience with our last television that had this, you still got a little bit of input lag. The TV picture just wasn't quite there, but it wasn't too bad. So if you're playing stuff that didn't involve a crazy amount of low latency to make your life easier, you could probably get away with it. But if you want to take that up a level, you probably then want to look at upscalers. They can basically take that component cable, you can plug that in, it will give you a HDMI out, you can plug that into your modern television, and everything just kind of works. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can then approach that. You can go for some really cheap converters that cost £10-15, and all they do is just push it into HDMI. Now, that works to, I don't know, prove that you've got a console that you've found up a loft that you're not sure if it works and you don't have a way of plugging it into a TV. That's the quick and easy way to do that. Those will have usually pretty horrendous input lag. So you have to look at something that's a little bit better than that to try and make it salvageable. And you've got loads of different ways of doing that. Like you could grab something like a RetroTink. I know that a lot of people swear by, there's like a 5X that's out there that costs like £100+, maybe £200, and it's meant to be really, really good. It upscales on the device, brings it all into like super HD, and the picture always looks pretty good. But that is obviously prohibitively expensive for people. You know, if you've already spent £35 on a cable, you maybe don't want to shell out £150, £200 on an upscaler. So me personally, what I use is called the McBazel GBS-C. So you can actually get this from Amazon. It's like a little orange box. It's about £60. That's roughly what I paid for it. That takes component in, and actually takes SCART as well, which SCART can be a decent option if you've got a really good high quality SCART cable, and feeds out a HDMI output. What I quite like about this is that you have a couple of different options in terms of the output that you can give out. So you can tell it to, all it needs to do is just simply take that picture from an old style picture to a new style and do no upscaling, do literally nothing, and just spit it back out to a television. Or you can actually tell it, give me this on like 720p or 1080p, and it will actually go do it. It's got built-in Wi-Fi, which is quite handy. You just jump on that, you can tinker around with a few things, move the picture around as you see fit. And it's a pretty reasonable bit of kit, I think, as an entry-level upscaler that you don't really need to do a massive amount of customizing to it, and that all just kind of works. I find that works really well. If you've got a PS2 and you're playing PS1, PS2 games, it's actually pretty decent. If you've got a GameCube and you've got the component cable for that, that is also an option. If you're talking, that's probably like a £100 roughly solution that would get you could get your PlayStation 2, and then you've got access to some of the best games and some of the best libraries of games that have probably ever existed. I think this is a fantastic option, personally. I think that ultimately you cannot go wrong with that option. You don't have to do too much. It's a lot of that is plug and play. You get your cable, you'll tell your PlayStation to output that in component, you chuck it into a upscaler, tell it to go to 720p or 1080p, and then that's you. You can chuck in something like the Getaway, and you can just sit and have a lovely time, and that's great. However, there is one other option that I would like to take, and this is the option that I would like to look at maybe in the future, in the next upcoming months, is rather than buy the upscalers and go that route. What you can actually do is still buy the nice fancy cable, but buy a CRT. These are the easiest way to play these old games, because the PlayStation 2, because the PS1, the GameCube, original Xbox were all designed for these television mined. If you put a game into an OG bit of kit and then plug it up to one of these CRTs, it will look the best it is going to look outside of emulation, texture packs and all that stuff. And all you have to do is just plug it into a television and that's it. For me, I don't really have the space currently to have a CRT, because you're talking, if you want to get one, it is usually around about £100, so it's a little bit more expensive than buying an upscaler. You would probably still want a good cable to go into that, but it's the space element for me is the real issue, and that I don't actually know where I would put it. For me, that's the goal though. For me, I'd love to be able to sit down with a decent sized CRT TV, get the PlayStation plugged in via component, and just sit and play Jak and Daxter, and basically take a trip down memory lane like as if I was like 7 or 8 years old. I think that would be the best way of doing things, and I'm hoping that it won't be in the next few weeks, maybe the next few months towards the end of the year. I would like to get myself a CRT and go down that journey of playing stuff like this on original hardware and original televisions to experience this the way that, in my opinion, you should experience this. Did I miss anything that was massively obvious there? Should I have considered a different way of playing these games? Because for me, this is certainly the options that I think you've got at hand. You have emulation using a PC, a handheld, etc. You have backwards compatibility through the latest Xboxes and PlayStations, depending on what the backwards compatibility looks like, and then playing on original hardware with an upscaler into a modern television, or without an upscaler but into a CRT. That to me is the best set of ways that you could play retro games in 2026, and you've got a different set of pros and cons for each one of them. But let me know down in the comments below which one you guys have chose to play your games on. And as always, folks, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you guys next time.